Excuse me.
Hello, good morning. My name is Story Bellows, and I direct the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics in the wonderful city of Philadelphia, which we can also call the innovation capital of the world, because I just said that. And I am really glad to be here, and I'm glad to be joined by an awesome group of panelists. Krista Canellakis from the Mayor's Office of Civic Innovation here in San Francisco, Michelle Lee from Textizen, and Jason Oliveira from Synthicity. And one of the things that I think a lot of us have been talking about over the last couple of years is how do cities and startups actually work together? And I think a lot of this conversation has started around we want to work with startups because startups are cool. And there was all of this like buzz around how do we get a great press or how do we get something that's really innovative into the city, but it was more like little flash in the pan type of engagements as opposed to creating lasting, sustainable processes that allow us to really deeply engage. And it's something that we've all been talking about for a while, and Krista's been running a program here in San Francisco that she's going to talk about, and I'll talk a little bit about what we've done in Philadelphia. But I think we're really at the beginning of learning how to do this well. And so we want this to be a really open conversation, and we want to break into a discussion sort of as quickly as possible to get feedback from all of you from both sides of the table. What is it that entrepreneurs need to do to engage more productively with cities? How do we as cities frame our challenges, work through some of the procurement barriers, create processes that are more transparent, that actually enable us to have really productive relationships and solve some of the most pressing challenges facing our cities. And so with that, I want to kick it over to Krista to talk a little bit about the EIR program in San Francisco. And then Jason has been a participant in that, so he's going to sort of respond from the entrepreneur side. And then Michelle sort of the same from the Philly side. And we really, it's a totally open conversation. We've said that to ourselves that we want to make sure that we're using this as an opportunity to really learn about how we can do this work better.
Great. Thanks, Story. So I'm Krista Canellakis. I work with the Mayor's Office of Civic Innovation. Our office was created when Mayor Lee first came to office. He calls San Francisco the innovation capital of the world. Also. The office was really created to champion new ideas and tools and approaches within government. So we partner with other city departments to kind of introduce new ways of interfacing with citizens, of deploying services. And the Entrepreneurship in Residence program is a really great and exciting example of that. It was a voluntary 16-week program where we wanted to figure out how can we explore innovative solutions to challenges that the city has really had a hard time solving on its own. So we worked with our city departments to kind of identify what are some of the gaps in the services that or products that they're delivering, and where are there opportunities for kind of technology-enabled solutions to those challenges. And so it was a 16-week program. We paired 6 startups with 6 city departments. And over the course of the program, we really saw that there was, we were able to create kind of a space for experimentation between the startups and the city departments. And Jason can kind of speak to that in practice and what that really looked like and felt like. And how we think about ourselves is in sort of our differentiation. There's a lot of different kind of models to this approach to civic tech. We don't really consider ourselves an accelerator or an incubator, but we're really trying to figure out and formalize ways to match city departments with startups, and really trying to help startups develop a better product market fit for some of the challenges the city has. So in the course of that the program, we had the transit agency, we had the planning department, we had the police department, the Department of Emergency Management, SFO, and the Department of Public Health. And I just wanted to highlight one particular collaboration that was exciting, and then Jason can kind of complement that with his work with the Planning Department. One collaboration was the San Francisco airport had identified that they needed to do a better job of navigating indoor navigation for the blind and visually impaired. It was something that the city was sort of mandated to do, but had a really hard time given, there's no GPS, doesn't work indoors. And there's a lot of great technology solutions for that. So we brought in a software developer who develops indoor navigation tools. They partnered with Lighthouse for the Blind, which is a 150-year-old nonprofit in San Francisco that works with the blind and visually impaired community. And over the course of 16 weeks, they built something. They built a prototype that they tested that prototype with users of Lighthouse for the Blind. And, at the end of the program, what was really inspirational for me and for all of us was to just hear the stories of people who are visually impaired, who can all of a sudden are empowered to find their way to the gate. We have enough trouble. Many of us have enough trouble finding our gate in an airport. Imagine, getting dropped off at the sidewalk and trying to find your way. So that was one of the most inspiring examples for me, and I can't wait to hear Jason's version of his experience in the program.
Sure. So I am user experience architect and product manager at Synthicity, and we're a software company that does visualization and analysis tools to help cities make better decisions. And we worked with a long-range planning group within the planning department to help them with their analysis of the financial feasibility of different development alternatives under different regulatory conditions. And there's no secret that San Francisco has huge amount of housing demand and a real challenge ahead in housing people affordably in the city. So our goal was to help address this problem by making better tools to analyze the problem within the planning department. And I think it was an overwhelming success, both for the planning department and for us, because the 16 weeks actually opened up the possibility to get really deep into understanding their objectives. And it brought us beyond just presenting what we have and getting immediate feedback on features. We could actually talk to several different people who have different roles in the department and understand what their real needs are, both in the short term, but the group that we worked with, I think by nature of them being long-range planners, were very articulate about their long-range vision, not only for how San Francisco plans, but for how the profession could work, and really understood how what we're proposing as a set of software tools can help them reach that vision. So some of the specific values and lessons learned during the program, the length of the program gave us time to iterate. So we were able to actually listen quite deeply, prototype, and then get feedback on the prototypes. And I think anyone who does software design recognizes that the feedback you get from a prototype is much more concrete and specific and spurs great conversations. So we had time to do that. Being able to understand the constraints of the department, there was some concern about the hardware that they have being capable of running what we designed for them. And that, I think, works two ways. One, we reconsidered what our hardware requirements for our software are. And we're always having this discussion about how much is a desktop application versus web applications now that that technology is advanced. So I think understanding these nuances that could be blockers to adoption of what we do and help could prevent them from actually getting the full value of what we do, we were able to really get down into the details. So we're still working out exactly how this unfolds next, but the relationship has been built and we have trust and can have real conversations about what's next.
Awesome. So I'll give a little bit of a brief overview of Fast Forward, which came out of the City of Philadelphia's application to the Bloomberg Philanthropies Mayor's Challenge in 2000. We were awarded the prize in 2013. And Fast Forward is really a collaboration among the City of Philadelphia, the Wharton Social Impact Initiative at University of Pennsylvania, and Good Company Ventures, which is a social impact accelerator, social enterprise accelerator. So we really are this accelerator program, and working with early stage companies, trying to bring them in to help solve challenges within a defined area of the city's sort of portfolio. And we worked with Wharton to sort of figure out which area of the city was the most ripe for actually focusing our efforts. We looked at education, we looked at public health, and we looked at public safety. And based on a variety of different factors, which actually took politics out of it. I think if we'd focused on politics and what was sort of the hot button issue, we would have focused on education, where it turns out we don't actually spend any money. So we wanted to focus our work somewhere where we had great leaders who were willing to say, you know what, like we have a lot of problems, and we don't have the solutions to those. And I think that's sort of a critical first step, is being able to admit politically that you don't know what the answers are. So we worked with these startups. We had 10 companies who participated in a 10-week accelerator. We gave each of them $10,000 stipends, and that also pre-qualified them for a pilot pool of funding, where we're actually running 3 pilots now, one of which is with Textizen. A lot of the engagement between the city folks and the entrepreneurs in our first cohort was really focused around the business acceleration, which was great for the startups in theory, but there was actually no real value proposition for the city folks to engage that way, other than the smart young individuals who recognize they're getting sort of a crash course MBA by sitting through and listening to what's going on with the startups. And so what we're doing in the second round is really focusing the engagement with the entrepreneurs around a number of different areas. And I've gotten sort of feedback from Michelle, has been sort of a great test case guinea pig as we've gone through this to get a sense of what's working and what's not working. And I think the first time around, we didn't get that deep buy-in around the solutions that the entrepreneurs could potentially provide, and figuring out, some people it's very clear who the potential buyer might be. For other folks, it takes a long time, and there's no natural path for getting to person X or a directory of all the potential places within the city that an entrepreneur might want to work. So we're now partnering each of the entrepreneurs with someone from the city who's gone through our city's Innovation Academy program, which Tim Wisniewski will be talking about at the same time tomorrow in the same room, I believe, if you want to learn more about that. But trying to figure out what are the ways that we can create both the conversations around the business acceleration, which is really critical, especially for early stage companies who are sort of reforming the way they're looking at their business model, but also around the solution development. How do we take these 10 weeks to really think through the development of a process for testing hypotheses, looking at interview skills, developing different personas so that we can use a lot of the sort of design curriculum that we've developed, but put that toward a specific end, so that we can get ultimately 10 great pilot proposals that makes us have a really hard conversation to figure out which of those we want to fund. I think that was the one lesson that we learned the first time around, was it doesn't just naturally happen that people are going to create these relationships, and we need to be more intentional about the design of that so that we can get fantastic pilot solutions that we have people on the inside fighting for, as well as the entrepreneurs fighting to get those dollars. So I love Michelle's.
Great. Hi, everyone. Michelle Lee, co-founder and CEO at Textizen. We started actually out of a Code for America project in 2012, helping the city of Philadelphia open up public engagement to anyone, whether or not they could make it to a public meeting. So we reached out in public places, asked people to text in their feedback. It kicked off an automated dialogue. I think pretty soon we realized that once people text in, you really have their attention. We saw 90% completion rates on surveys. We could text people back a couple weeks after they received services and get really great response rates. So tracking outcomes and hitting people when and where it counts. And so I think the floodgates started to open as to what we could do, and I think 3 things that the City of Philadelphia's Fast Forward program helped us do was, 1, really galvanize us around, how can we put this to work, put the rubber to the road in the area of public safety and human services. So, crystallizing the opportunity there and giving us the chance to work hand in hand with department leads on figuring out strategies. Because if you build software right, even your visualization software, if you build software right, it's scalable, it can apply to lots of different problems, and you don't have to work department by department. I think, unfortunately, that's how buying works typically. Well, what other long-range planning departments have used visualization software? It really should be stormwater management and long-range planning, and all sorts of opportunities within the same city, tapping the same software for different applications. So that's one thing I think cities, I urge you to become better, hungrier, more demanding consumers of technology and kind of challenge what any given software can do. Talk to the startup founders, talk to company owners, and let's co-create. Second thing is around the Fast Forward program, I think the current RFP process is broken, we all know this, but I think the most broken part of it is this cone of silence. You put out a homework assignment, ask people to fill out the worksheet, and then you evaluate based solely on the worksheet when there's a whole person behind it. It's like choosing a mail order spouse from a catalog. Why not build a relationship with the department head and really get to evaluate each other, as I'm sure you've been doing in your program, as we've been doing in ours. Last thing is, the contracting, I don't think has been resolved yet. We had a 2-month plus delay in the contract, but now we have faces and humans tied to the process that give me a lot more confidence of success at the end. This morning at 6:30, got a call from Bill Hart, head of RISE. We're double teaming the legal department to get the contract out on time, and that's really improving our chance of success. It's not us versus them, it's us plus the city against the red tape. Yeah. So. Those are my 3 takeaways. Happy to talk more about it, but I think we want to get to Q&A as quickly as possible.
Yeah. One question I have, Krista, if you could talk a little bit about what are some of the pathways to contracts that you guys are working through. How is that working on your side?
Sure. So one thing I wanted to add, sort of just because we have similar goals in our programs, but our models are really different. You guys did a pre-RFP process. We didn't do that. We did an open call for different solutions, and then based on what we saw, kind of matched them with the department. And for each, and we were encouraging our departments to work with the startup companies after the program. It wasn't a requirement for the department to participate in the program, but each startup or each collaboration kind of has a different procurement story. All the departments really loved working with the startups, and kind of depending on the pilot, depending on the technology and kind of the cost of technology, they've each sort of had different outcomes. So it's still something we're figuring out for the next phase. Like, how can we learn from what Philadelphia did and sort of like doing that pre-RFP process, so that at the end of the program there can be a more kind of formal institutionalized path for the startups. But it's something we haven't figured out yet.
I mean, I'd like to add to that just a second. As entrepreneurs, I think having the space of not having as solid an expectation of a deliverable was really valuable, because we could explore more possibilities. I think if we had an expectation that we would have a certain product at the end, it would have been a very different interaction, which could be valuable in its own right. But given the stage that we're at with what we're developing, having that open-ended conversation was useful. I think if we did this again in a year and had a more solidified product when we started the program, then something that was more defined at the outset as far as procurement would have been helpful.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add, like for us, this was a the program itself was a prototype. We had zero budget. We just had staff to deliver on the program, and as part of the process, we were talking with all the procurement officers, and they are people that have worked for the city for a long time, and like across the board, they're like, this is the most fun thing that I've done in my job in ages. Like, if there's There was one woman who said if there's any, she's been working for the city for 20 years, and she said if there's anything I can do, I want to be able to work with more entrepreneurial teams. Like they really listened to us. They wanted to actually hear our problems and help us build things together. So I think just having those conversations has been really important to figure out what the kind of more formal pathways will look like for the next round.
I think we should mention that a little bit of funding can go a long way. In the case of Fast Forward, for us to be able to go to a department and say, hey, we'd like to work together and we can bring this Bloomberg funding to the table, that meant the relationship can start now instead of the next fiscal year. And I think that is going to pay off in terms of contracting success over a longer period of time. It's just a different approach and different timing.
I think one question I have, Michelle, is looking at what do you think the role of actually having a formal accelerator, working with the city? Did that work for you, or would it have been more helpful to have, there's a pilot pool at the end, but you're really sitting, 2 days a week with the folks at Rise, or did you need to work through some of the acceleration stuff in order to figure out where you wanted to focus your efforts?
I think it might have been valuable to scale back some of the acceleration components to create more time for hand-in-hand collaboration, which is happening now. But then the projects would have had to be awarded or determined earlier. I would say one of the most valuable aspects of the accelerator is, as we look to our left and our right, we're building a community here. And communities of civic technologists are growing everywhere. The accelerator, I met people that I will be friends with and collaborators with for a long time. And I don't know if this, that's going in the formal report to Bloomberg or to the mayor, but I think it played a really important role in building a community in the region.
Let's open it up to questions from you. I have a bunch of more questions, but would love to engage other folks. In the back.
Hi, Liz Hansen from the City of Boulder, also the World Capital of Innovation.
How many world capitals of innovation do we have in the room?
I appreciate the labeling of that title very much. It's a big issue in our community. My question has to do with the San Francisco model, combining the 6 startups with the 6 departments. You talked about the RFP kind of selecting the startups. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the process of selecting the projects. It seems to me figuring out which city projects and needs are a good match for this kind of quick and dirty approach would be a little challenging.
Sure. So it was a combination of it was sort of a chicken and an egg kind of process. So we first reached out to the department heads that were really the first that were working on issues that were a priority for the mayor, and were strong leaders within the city. And so we talked with them about some of the challenges that they were facing. And in our call, it wasn't a formal RFP. It was sort of an open application process, just with a list of questions. In that call, we sort of identified some of those challenges that we discussed with the department head, but then we also said this is open, so anyone can apply for this program. If you see your product being applicable to government, we want to hear from you. And so we received over 200 applicants for those and we didn't know how many departments we were going to work with at that point, but we saw what came in, and there were a few that we said, hey, this is a really cool startup, and we reached out to the department head who we thought that might be applicable for, and built the relationship and kind of got them to buy into the program. So it was kind of a little bit of, we wanted to put out something tangible in the call, but then we also wanted to be open to see what we got.
I could add a little bit to that. Even after the program started, I think it was a good 3 or 4 weeks before we decided which problem to solve. So even within the scope of a department and specific agendas that they had as immediate needs, we did a bunch of conversations about product market fit and what technologies we have, how far along they were, and what we could accomplish in the scope of the program.
Speaking of innovation capitals of the world, the Fast Forward program in Philadelphia had 5 companies with a presence in Philadelphia and 5 from outside. What was the breakdown in the San Francisco program?
Let's see. We had one company that came from Austria, and they actually flew out regularly from Vienna. We had another company from New York, and then all the rest were Bay Area based.
It's our second cohort is interestingly, we thought it would be potentially more Philadelphia applicants. We got fewer Philadelphia applicants for the second cohort. So we have 8 companies now from outside of Philadelphia, which I think was not something that we necessarily expected.
How'd you go about getting the word out to these startups about the opportunity?
So, we again, with no marketing budget, I think we were covered in a lot of big media. So we were covered in a lot of the big tech media. There was an article in the New York Times. We reached out to our networks. We have strong kind of networks in the innovation and tech sector. So we just did a lot of, emails, and it was really sort of guerrilla marketing around it, just to get the word out.
I think we did sort of the same thing in Philadelphia, and for a traditional RFQ, we'd never gotten 80-some applicants for one of our RFQs in the city of Philadelphia, and I think one of the other aspects of this program is looking at what are some of the barriers that we can remove in the procurement system that actually allow us to sort of create these, like, the legal structures that allow us to work with entrepreneurs and startups. And in addition to, sure, there are terms and conditions and things like that and policies that we need to fix, but there are a lot of just good practices that we don't ever actually think through in terms of the opportunities that we have to work with the city. Like, why don't we treat some of our RFPs as like an actual campaign? When we want to get the word out, instead we just post it in one place and we expect that everybody's going to come and search our website that doesn't notify everybody, ever. Like, all of a sudden, I want to spend all of my free time checking out the eContract Philly website. Like, guess what? That's not going to happen. So how do we, I think one of the things that we're trying to think through is, how do we show folks in other departments, like, what works when you want to get a lot of responses? Like, tell people that you have an opportunity instead of just posting it. Like, share this information with folks. It's not, some of it isn't really the heavy lifting that we're all so worried about. Some of it's just like taking advantage of communication practices and other things like that that can have a big impact on who knows what's going on. Yeah.
Texas, innovation capital of Texas. How do you see these sorts of programs or models translating to smaller or medium-sized cities that don't necessarily have the entrepreneurial base or tech sector to do what you're doing?
I can share an answer from Philadelphia, which, yes, is a big city, but I think had to start small. Mm-hmm. So 2 years ago, the city was looking for a contractor to build out a mobile website, for a certain program. They released the RFP on GitHub. People could submit comments on GitHub. Everything was publicly available. Furthermore, they required that the responses be submitted as GitHub pages, and that demonstrated the firm's ability to write modern web technology, and you could actually look at their work, look at their source code. So that's an example of a totally free, fairly lightweight way to kind of hack around the current procurement process. I think it's feasible for almost any region. Mark Head will have more info on that. That was he's doing.
One thing I would add is we are actually looking for another partner city for our second cohort. And our thinking behind that is if we can get multiple cities to do a call together for solutions, then we can achieve scale. We're helping to build the ecosystem, and we will hopefully get a lot of startups to apply, and we can all sort of then kind of matchmake and figure out what's the best way to sort of to spread the love a little bit around different cities. So if there's any cities out there, any of those other innovation capitals, we are looking for another partner city.
Yeah, in the back, and then Nick.
I was wondering if there's a larger umbrella organization or way that companies that go through these types of accelerator programs can connect and share learning, and also for other cities that want to jump on board, if there's an easy way that they can quickly learn
I mean, from the city side, I think we're sort of at this new, this is a new thing, which is why we're here talking about it. And we certainly want to share the lessons that we're learning. I mean, I've learned a lot from Krista and some, we're rethinking our pitch day based on, some of the conversations that I had with their team. And so now instead of pitching to investors, we're pitching to other cities to try to share the solutions that we have with other folks. And so I think, we would certainly love to chat and see if there are opportunities to potentially, formalize. We said, should we be on the phone once a month just chatting about what's going on? But, thinking through, I think there's City Mart is another organization that works a lot with startups who are working with cities, probably not who've necessarily gone through this type of program, but I don't know how many other cities have formal programs sort of in this area. I think we're sort of at a nascent space for that. Nick?
So is there any concern, or how do you balance the intimacy leading to a solution that's only good for the San Francisco land department versus something that can actually scale beyond? So like when we talk about intimate conversations, feedback from one, someone that works a lot of cities, like it feels like it'd be easy to get down a rabbit hole where you build something that's great for San Francisco but may not be applicable to Philly or Boston or somewhere else.
I mean, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, I think the conversations might be based in a specific instance of a problem, but I think the whole context of learning what the issues are as a whole allow us to design in such a way that the tools we build can address the specific need but are general enough to work for another planning department in another city or a different department that has similar needs for analysis, but swap out what the labels are on a dialog box and it's basically the same tool. So I think we're always thinking about scalability. I mean, we're a young startup and we want to grow. So it's not about custom one-off solutions as the end game. But I think if you build something well that some people love and use, chances are other people are going to love and use it if it's cleverly and intelligently constructed. So I don't think they're exclusive.
And I think to Krista's point, and it's something that we've thought about as well, is how do we as cities work with other cities and bring them into the fold as we define the problems, as we work with the city departments to sort of refine the solutions, and then as we ultimately deploy those. I mean, we want as a city to actually help the companies that we're working with to scale. So we don't want them to develop solutions that are only going to be useful in Philadelphia. But I think creating those partnerships to actually work with other cities, both on the problem definition and then the sort of design and deployment of that solution, are areas where we need to keep pushing ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that was even part of our selection process, was making sure that the collaborations would be something that could scale to other cities. As a program where we're not funding the projects, we want to make sure that this San Francisco is able to add value to those startups. So the airport, for example, said if they're able to make something work, I'll introduce them to every airport director in the country, or in the world, actually, he said. And so we wanted those kind of department heads who were, they're getting voluntary, they're getting, startups are lean and they have a lot going on. So we need to figure out how to align incentives so that it was something really valuable for the startup.
Sasha?
I just wanted to a little bit of a story from Europe. We'll talk about it maybe in the session later that follows in the plenary. But in Barcelona, we've created a program called the Barcelona Open Challenge, which was a $1.5 million procurement designed to contract largely designed to contract 6 startups and really directly bring them into the contracting system. But what was really important when we were designing the program, it was completely agnostic to whether your startup was created a day ago or was 3 years old or even older. And the way they managed the credibility, because they were sourcing large citywide systems, was to actually design a path that you actually get your first contract that might be worth $250,000, and then actually structure the intellectual property rights between the city and the company in a way that you will then automatically be able to scale to something that could become a $5 million contract. and the structure behind it, and this created a lot of engagement. So when we talked about the resonance for an RFP, we had 55,000 visitors to the RFP page. To give you an idea, normally procurement officials will tell you they get about 20 to 120. So 25,000 from the city itself, from citizens were creating, we had 12 new companies created in the city by citizens responding to this, and about 35,000 internationally. And again, this was relatively speaking, Barcelona spends $2.5 billion a year in procurement. This was peanuts as compared to the budget items, peanuts as compared to the 30% unemployment we have in the country, but actually hugely impactful also in communicating how the city wants to work with entrepreneurs and startups.
Well, I think that touches on one of the points that we as cities don't yet really know how to manage risk in the same way that like the venture capital industry thinks through that. And I think, you know, to some degree, these types of programs allow us to manage risk in that way where, you know, as we're selecting our 10 startups, we can pick, you know, we're not going to select 10 completely wacky companies, but we actually can pick one or two that we have no idea where this is going to go. And there aren't that many spaces in the city where we have the freedom to sort of think through what's the risk profile. You know, how do we actually fund some of this stuff? How do we create like graduated negotiation of terms and conditions that, you know, as we're testing something out, we're operating under different rules, but we actually can scale something, which I think is one of the things that Barcelona has, you know, sort of been a real leader in figuring that out. So,
Yes, I'm from Puerto Rico. I hope one day we have something like this in place. I was wondering, in terms of, you said that you had no budget to set this program, so what are the minimum conditions you think you should have internally? And maybe in terms of minimum staff you have to have this programs in place, and I guess there's no magical recipe, you know, but in terms of your experience.
Yeah, I think we had, I think probably the equivalent of one full-time staff that was working on it. So it was like maybe 50-50 between two people. I think it was really, really important to have leadership around the program so that we could have the right conversations with the department heads and really make sure that the startups were working on problems that were really important to the department head and to the mayor. And so there was a lot of, and that the department head would, you know, assign someone to be available for the startup, you know, be in the meeting and really work towards a solution at the end of the 16-week program. So that buy-in was really important. You know, one thing that was really, and Jason can speak to this too, is we had, it was really effective, was that we had a demo day. We told the department and we told the startup, at the end of the program, you will be kind of on stage in City Hall with the mayor, with other cities, and you know, we expect for you to show something. And so just having that date and having was really an important driver to create urgency around the program and to get people, you know, get people going.
I think for us, one of the pieces that Wharton brought was sort of the rigor of the business school approach to actually analyzing what area would be ripe for this kind of approach. And so we went through a process of interviewing a bunch of people to figure out sort of what were the hot button issues. And so then we did a deep dive into looking at 3 of those areas. And there were certain internal factors that we thought were really interesting, like how much money do we spend in this area, who controls that spending, what's the leadership of those departments actually look like, are these folks who are willing to be the guinea pigs? And then we looked at things, externally, like what's the regulatory environment? There are a lot of opportunities, I think, within the health space, but to potentially, develop something really quickly and be able to show some quick wins where there are a lot of regulatory issues that you need to think through. That was an area that, for a number of reasons, we were like, maybe we should stay away from that at the start. And as we evolve, I think there are opportunities to go into some other spaces. But I think at the end of the day, leadership really was like a critical thing for us, and making sure that we just had the right people who were going to say, sure, I have no idea where this is going to go, but I'm willing to spend some of my time and I'm willing to test it out.
I just want to reiterate the value of having the quick win and something that's achievable within the context of the program that can be demonstrated at the end. Our vision for what we do is much greater than what we could accomplish in 4 months. But having the focus was critical to having everyone understand what we were doing, and for us to have something that we could show at the end of the day and say, this is what we did, what do you think about it? Let's move it to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
How about the relationship with internal IT staff and CIOs and stuff?
So we engaged people at sort of a variety of different levels. We had folks like our CIO is participating in panel discussions every week. He's not there every week, but we have like a senior person from the city who's now going to be on a panel every week. So that, I think, demonstrates sort of buy-in at a high level. We had the mayor show up to a reception early on to say, you know what, I actually want you guys to succeed, and I'm going to be here, and I'm going to make sure that you are getting the access that you need to the folks in key leadership positions. But then I think the piece that we really need to work through more is like, how do we engage the folks who are on the ground working every day in these departments and getting them really excited about the work that's going on, which I feel like is sort of what the EIR program, one of the things that we learned from that is thinking through how do we engage those folks. It's great to get the people at the top, but I think you really need the grassroots level buy-in in terms of the co-creation of these solutions and figuring out sort of what's the best pathway to navigate the internal city politics. We need to work on that a little bit more. Yep.
Question for the entire panel. I'm wondering what role you think the startup should play in driving deeper engagement between a government organization and its constituents, besides just the technology itself.
Go ahead.
So this has been top of mind for Textizen for a long time because in addition to the software, essentially people can get into Textizen in 2 ways. One is we reach out in public places completely offline and get people to come in. The other is a department has a relationship with people they're already providing services to and they import phone numbers. But in the first case, in the former case, you have to have a strong ground game to complement that digital aspect, and I think that is something that cities don't often think about when we think about digital communication. It's what's going to make you take your phone out of your pocket and open up an app or download an app, install an app, create an account? What's going to make you navigate to a website and spend some time clicking around? So, the unboxing experience, which we hear about so often with the new iPhone or whatever device, the unboxing experience of digital engagement is also important, and I think because of this particular application that we provide, that gives us an opportunity to open the dialogue. People come to us looking for technology, and we say, we can bring the technology, but you have to bring the commitment within your department. Is that helpful?
I would say I think showing people what's possible, not just telling us what can be done, but having the patience to sort of navigate through a couple of different doors, knowing that there's never going to be one front door, no matter, if you're a city of 25,000 or you're a city of, 10 million. There are always going to be multiple pathways, and so I think partially it's a little bit of persistence and patience is required, but I feel like showing people that there are possibilities and listening to their needs is really, really critical. And I think being a good citizen and sort of showing up goes a long way.
Right. I think being labeled as a startup, I think conveys the message that you're willing to listen and that you're willing to build something from scratch, and as opposed to a more established company where there might be the impression that you're not going to craft a solution for someone's needs.
Mm-hmm. And with that, I think we have to cut it off. But thank you all very much, and I'm sure we'll all be willing to stick around if there are any other questions. So thank you.
Thank you.